Hi, Misha here, and this is the second up-close look at the Russian family of MiGs, jet fighters, interceptors. And the original video, it was an overview, and then the second video was an up-close look at the MiG-15 and the MiG-17, first-generation fighters, subsonic, transonic, if you will, of the 1950s. And in this video, we're going to look at the second generation of fighters, which started to appear, in general, second generation, mid-50s through the 1960s, kind of defines second generation. And these are usually, classified by the fact that they were supersonic, usually had afterburners, a greater emphasis was placed on radar. New materials, aluminum alloys and such, were used in their construction. New advanced electronics, vacuum tubes advanced for that day and time. Also, the second generation of jets was designed specifically with the idea of nuclear warfare in mind, as there was a real threat in the 50s. It basically just bigger, faster, better. Now, on the table here, we have my MiG-21. But Russia's first successful supersonic, therefore second-generation fighter, was actually the MiG-19. But apologies, I don't have one of those. So I'll just quickly run through. The MiG-19's NATO name was FARMER. The prototype first flew in 1952, and it first went into production and service in 1955. It was capable of Mach 1.2, or there a little faster. It could go even higher than previous generations, up past 57,000 feet. It's also a little bit longer at about 41 feet. Had a wingspan of 29.5 feet. And it could carry, it still had 4 wing pylons, but 2 of them were dedicated to fuel tanks, so they were, wet. The 2 other pylons could carry up to 500 kilograms each, so greater capacity. It had 2 engines, still a crew of 1. It had 3 cannon, all were 30 millimeter. Had a total round capacity of 205. And it was okay, but really was a blip on the radar. It was kind of analogous to the American F-100 Super Sabre. Came out around the same time. While it could achieve high speeds and high altitudes, it did sacrifice for maneuverability. The new engines were more fiddly to maintain than previous generations. And it had a limited fuel capacity, so its range was quite limited. It's also kind of more or less designed to be an interceptor. Still a fighter, capable, but interceptor. But because of, really just because of a lot of factors, when it was coming into service and what was coming after, they only made about 2,100 in Russia, with an unknown number made in China. But not all that many nations use these. Most of them opted to stick with the 17 or even the 15. Because the 19 was just kind of that first, second generational step. And it wasn't before too long that this critter here, the MiG-21, came around. And this was the quintessential MiG fighter of the 1960s and even into the 70s, and possibly the most famous MiG ever created. So let's move on to it. The MiG-21. The Russians called it the Balalaika because of its shape. The Poles called it the pencil because of its nose cone. And NATO christened it the FISHBED. This was an advanced second-generation fighter from Russia. Originally, in 1954, MiG set out to design a Mach 2 fighter, but early engines were not up to the job. 1955, they went from using swept wings to a delta wing, tried that out, and thus in 1956, the first prototype, which would lead to this craft here, was flown. And then it was put into production and service in 1959. As with later second-generation craft, it was more concerned with guided missiles. At that time, infrared was the common way, but also there was use of, at least early use of radar guided, and then they would also use TV guided bombs on these types of craft. It was designed as a fighter interceptor combo. And yeah, it never actually got to Mach 2. Its maximum speed was about 1.75. Still quite fast, considerably faster than the previous 19, and definitely supersonic. It's about 48 feet long, so longer than what we've seen before, but it has a much narrower wing at 23 feet. Also, we have 4 hard points. All are capable of carrying missiles, bombs, rockets, or fuel tanks. A wide range of air-to-air and air-to-surface missiles were armed with, able to be put on this thing. This shock cone in the front is very interesting and a very generational. You looked at the 17 and the 15 they had with the open nose. This is kind of an interim step. That cone could be adjusted front, back to compensate airflow. This had a relatively high ceiling of about 57,500 feet. And boy, all the things you could say about this plane. In Russia and Europe, about 11,500 were produced, and then an additional number in China. This made it the most mass-produced supersonic jet fighter of all time. It was also the most produced military fighter since the Korean War. Went into production in 1959, stayed in production in Russia until 1985, which for a long time it held the record for longest production run of a military supersonic jet, but today it's been surpassed by American craft such as the F-16, but for a long time it was that. It was quite simple and easy to maintain, pretty basic internally in a good way. It could operate from pretty primitive airfields, which is something that Russia wanted and that Vietnam definitely was into. Speaking of Vietnam, the first of these hit that country in 1966, and they were given the most experienced pilots. And by 1972, Vietnam had a total of 4 MiG-21 squadrons. That was actually what they would end up with. And they would keep these in active Vietnamese service until 2015, so quite recently. The MiG-21 would be used by over 60 nations. And actually, several are still in use today around the world. And what's a testament to this design, they've been able to upgrade them to relatively modern standards, including electronics. As I said, this one is from Finland. And it's interesting, it wasn't just COMBLOC allies that bought the MiG-21. India and Finland, amongst many other traditional NATO allies, because it was a lighter aircraft, cheaper, easier to maintain than Western designs. And while it did have a relatively limited armament of 4 missiles. It did at least retain a cannon. It had a 23mm cannon with a 200 round capacity, so that was good. They didn't get rid of the cannon. And these went up against all kinds of American aircraft in the Vietnam War. F-104, F-105, the F-4 Phantom, of course, quite famously pairing. The F-5 Freedom Fighter. And they've been used all around the world. So yeah, it's quite, I'd say it's the, I don't know, I want to say it is probably the most iconic MiG. The 15 and the 21 have a lot to recommend them, but I don't know, did I say 50? I said 15 and 29, I hoped. Anyway, I meant to. Anyway, the 15 and 29 have a lot to recommend them, but the 21 is just iconic. It was made in very large numbers. Extremely versatile and configurable. As far as the Hobbymaster model, I have to say I really like this one. I like that it's Finnish. The shock cone and all that is very neat. Little pilot inside. The only problem I have is the stand isn't awesome. It kind of just sits on like a tripod, and it ostensibly plugs into little holes, but not great. And a couple of my missiles keep wanting to drop out, so I might put a little tiny bit of tack or something in there. They fit well. The problem with these real small missiles on these 1/72 scales, if you make them too delicate, they break when you try to put them in. But if you beef them up, then they don't look right and they don't fit right. So it's kind of a catch-22. So I'm a little bit tolerant of that. And of course you can always display it with either fuel tanks, bombs, or nothing at all. So you're not committed to the missiles. I just put them on. And as usual, you can do gear up, gear down. There are also a couple of antennae in the bag that I haven't put in yet. But I probably will. But I figured for now, while doing this, why have one or two more things to snag if I didn't have to? So yeah, Russia's later second generation jet fighter, very capable and very well known around the world. The MiG-21 FISHBED. Alrighty folks, appreciate you tuning in. If you could, like, share, and subscribe, and also check out some of the other videos. This is Misha. Catch you very soon next time.